Dear friends, let us come together in quietness for just a moment. This is how Joel S. Goldsmith would open, inviting us not merely to listen, but to enter the atmosphere of spirit, to turn inward where truth reveals itself. Today, I want to begin with a question, one so ancient, yet so urgently relevant to the modern heart. What if the real source of your abundance has never been found in the things you chase, but in the presence you've overlooked? You see, the Master's words, "Man shall not live by bread alone," were not a warning against material life, but an unveiling of a deeper law, that true supply, true security, and true fullness flow from a dimension unseen, an inner wellspring untouched by the world's fluctuations. Goldsmith taught that when we lean upon the visible, we inherit its limitations, but when we lean upon the invisible, we enter a life where supply becomes effortless, spontaneous, and divinely ordered. In the moments ahead, I want to explore with you why this single statement, "Man shall not live by bread alone," may very well be the key you've been missing on your journey towards spiritual abundance. And if you stay with me, I will share the one shift in consciousness that opens the door to receiving from a source that never runs dry. But first, before we continue deeper, support this message by liking the video, commenting your symbolic number below, and subscribing so you and I can keep walking this spiritual path together. Because what I'm about to reveal next just might change the way you understand abundance forever. And so, as we step from that opening moment into the heart of this teaching, we begin with the first and perhaps most essential realization. As abundance flows from the invisible source, not outer conditions, let us continue seamlessly from where we left off. You see, when we hear those words, "Man shall not live by bread alone," we are being gently led away from the illusion that life is held together by visible means. Bread, in this context, is more than food. It represents everything the world tells us we must depend on: money, security, status, the approval of others, even our own human strength. And yet, if we look closely, every one of those things is temporary, fluctuating, and forever slipping through the fingers of those who cling to them. Joel Goldsmith often reminded us that thus the visible world is only the effect, never the cause. Trying to live from effects is like trying to warm your home by touching the flames instead of lighting the fire. The warmth doesn't originate in the flame you see, it originates in the fire that creates it. In the same way, the supply you see, the job, the income, the opportunities, is not the true source of your abundance. It is only the expression. The cause lies deeper, hidden, spiritual. And this is where so many of us struggle. We have been trained to believe that life comes to us from the outside. That supply must be earned, chased, forced into existence through effort, worry, and constant striving. But when we take a moment to become still, just as Goldsmith always invited his students to do, we begin to feel something profound. There is a presence within us that does not strain, does not grasp, does not fear lack, and does not depend on the shifting circumstances of the world. This invisible source is the same source that feeds the lilies, clothes the fields, guides the birds in their migrations, and orchestrates the rhythm of the ocean without a moment's hesitation. It is the life that lives through us, not merely around us. And when we begin to sense this, even faintly, something subtle yet transformative happens. We stop clinging to what we can see, and we begin trusting what we cannot. Goldsmith called this turning within, not as a poetic phrase, but as a spiritual law. The moment you stop treating outer conditions as your provider, you open the door to an entirely new flow, one that is not limited by your job, your past, your bank account, your education, or your circumstances, because the invisible source is not bound by any of those. When you shift your attention inward, even briefly, you begin to feel the stirrings of peace, assurance, and direction. These are not emotions. They are evidence that the source is active. And from that inner activity, outer supply begins to appear in ways you could never have engineered with your human mind. Opportunities arise unforced. Solutions present themselves. Doors open without struggle. People come into your life who carry the very answers you didn't know how to find. All of this begins the moment you stop looking at the visible for your sustenance and begin acknowledging the invisible as your only true source. And as we rest in the understanding that supply originates from the invisible rather than the outer world, a natural progression unfolds into the second realization. Thus, dependence on material bread limits spiritual supply. This is where the teaching becomes both challenging and liberating, because it calls us to examine the very foundation upon which most of us have built our sense of security. Bread, in the scriptures, symbolizes tangible forms: money, possessions, titles, human relationships, physical strength, and all the visible supports we lean upon for safety and certainty. None of these are wrong in themselves, they are part of our human experience. But the danger arises when we make them our source. For when we depend on the limited, we inherit the limitations. When we cling to the unstable, we inherit the instability. And when we worship the visible, we cut ourselves off from the infinite flow that seeks to move through us. Goldsmith would often point out that the moment we attach our security to a person, a job, a bank account, or even our own abilities, we have already stepped into a life of tension. Why? Because the entire visible world is temporary. It can shift, it can be lost, it can change without our permission. And when we build our trust upon something that can be taken away, fear becomes the silent companion of our daily life. Look closely at your own experience. How often have you felt anxiety because you believed your good depended on a certain outcome? A certain paycheck arriving, a certain individual showing up, a certain opportunity working out. This is the subtle but powerful form of bondage that arises when we rely on bread alone. Even when the bread is present, the fear of losing it remains. And fear is always a sign that we have placed our faith in the wrong foundation. But when Goldsmith spoke of shifting reliance, he wasn't asking us to abandon the visible world. He was inviting us to reinterpret it. To understand that the job is not the provider, it's merely the channel. The person who helps you is not the source, they are the instrument. The income is not the supply, it is the expression. This distinction is everything, because the moment you know the difference, you no longer panic when a channel closes. You no longer crumble when a relationship shifts. You no longer collapse when a plan dissolves. Instead, you recognize that the closing of one channel simply indicates that another, often greater, avenue of good is already forming. Dependence on material bread shrinks the field of possibility to whatever your human mind can see. But dependence on spirit expands your possibilities to whatever the infinite can orchestrate. The human mind is limited by logic, timing, and circumstance. The spirit is not bound by any of these. And when you shift your reliance inward, life begins to unfold in ways that bypass your expectations entirely. You begin to realize that you were never meant to live at the mercy of the visible world. You were meant to live from a source that is untouched by it. And with that recognition, understanding that the visible is merely a channel and never the source, we move naturally into the third realization. Conscious union with the inner presence is the true foundation of prosperity. This is the turning point where the teaching moves from philosophy to experience, from concept to actual living awareness. For Goldsmith, prosperity was never about accumulation, it was about connection. Not a connection with outer things, but a living, felt communion with the presence that dwells within. Because the moment you sense that presence, even in the faintest whisper, you touch the very root from which all visible forms of good arise. It is not an idea you memorize, it is a state you enter. And this union is not achieved through effort or strain. It does not require rituals or elaborate practices. It begins with a simple inner turning, a willingness to pause the outward chase and sink into the quiet where the presence announces itself. This presence is not something to be found, it is something to be recognized. It has been with you since the beginning, silently supporting, guiding, and sustaining you, even when you were unaware of it. But when you become consciously aware of it, something remarkable happens. Fear begins to dissolve. The sense of isolation fades. A subtle but unmistakable confidence rises from within, not a confidence in your personal abilities, but a confidence in the ever-present source that operates through you. This shift in awareness is the real prosperity. It is the bedrock upon which all outer harmony rests. Goldsmith often said that when we live separated from this presence, when we act as though we are self-powered beings, we enter struggle. We exhaust ourselves trying to arrange life, fix problems, push outcomes, and force supply to appear. But when the awareness of the inner presence becomes real, we no longer function as individuals isolated from God. We function as instruments through which an infinite wisdom expresses itself. This conscious union is not mystical in the sense of being unreachable. It is mystical in the sense of being beyond human effort. It is discovered whenever we shift from thinking to listening, from striving to resting, from fear to quiet receptivity. And in that shift, something begins to move, something gentle, subtle, yet profoundly alive. Ideas flow where confusion once sat. Guidance speaks where uncertainty once ruled. Peace appears where worry once took root. This inner awareness does not merely comfort, it provides. It orders your steps, arranges your circumstances, what brings into manifestation whatever is necessary for your growth, your well-being, and your purpose. Not through magic, but through a divine law that becomes active when the mind is aligned with its source. And here is the beauty. Once you have even one moment of conscious union, you realize that supply has nothing to do with what you possess. It has everything to do with what you are connected to. You begin to see that prosperity was never something outside to be gained, but something inside to be recognized and allowed to flow. And as this conscious union becomes more familiar, no longer a rare moment but a living undercurrent, you begin to witness the fourth realization unfolding almost on its own. This spiritual awareness dissolves fear of lack and insecurity. This is where the inner work starts transforming the very atmosphere of your life, because the fear of not having enough is not a financial issue. It is a spiritual misunderstanding. Fear of lack doesn't arise because we are missing something. It arises because we believe we are separate from the source that supplies everything. The human mind, conditioned by years of survival thinking, holds the assumption that its well-being depends on the outer world, on stable circumstances, predictable outcomes, and visible evidence. But once the awareness of the inner presence becomes real, those old assumptions begin to lose their power. Goldsmith often pointed out that fear cannot exist in the same space as spiritual recognition. The moment you turn toward the presence within, even if just for a breath, the inner landscape begins to shift. The mind quiets. The emotions settle. A gentle assurance moves through you, as though something unseen whispers, "All is well." And the moment that whisper becomes believable, fear starts to fall away like a garment you no longer need to wear. This is not denial, it is alignment. Fear is not pushed away. It dissolves because it no longer has a foundation to stand on. You begin to notice that the situations that once triggered panic or anxiety now meet a different response within you. Instead of rushing into worry, you pause. Instead of imagining the worst, you listen. Instead of tightening your grip, you open inwardly to the presence that has already guided you through every moment of your life, even when you were unaware. And something else beautiful happens. You stop interpreting temporary conditions as permanent truths. A dip in income, a shift in circumstances, a delay, a closed door. None of these hold the same weight they once did. Because spiritual awareness shows you that conditions are not causes, and therefore they cannot define your future. They are simply shadows that pass across the screen of life, unable to alter the source from which your supply truly flows. This dissolving of fear also brings a powerful clarity. You begin to see how much energy was once wasted in apprehension, in imagining lack, in rehearsing worst-case scenarios. That mental habit loses its grip because your trust is no longer placed in outer structures, but in the presence that stands behind them. The heart becomes lighter. Decisions become clearer. Life becomes less about control and more about cooperation with something wiser than your intellect. And perhaps most significantly, insecurity transforms into a steady inner confidence. Again, not confidence in the personal self, but in the impersonal, ever-present spirit that animates your life. You realize that you are not navigating the world alone, trying to piece together your own well-being. You are being carried, guided, supplied, and supported by a presence that cannot fail because it is not dependent on the world. As this awareness deepens, the fear that once limited your choices, restricted your vision, and held you back from growth begins to dissolve. Because the foundation it stood on, the belief in separation, has been replaced by the recognition of your oneness with the infinite. And as this recognition of oneness settles into the heart, dissolving the old fears and insecurities that once shaped your decisions, another profound realization emerges with remarkable clarity. Real supply appears through intuition. What not effort or struggle, this is where the rhythm of life begins to change, because you are no longer trying to force outcomes into existence. You are learning to receive them from a deeper intelligence that operates far beyond the limits of human planning. In the human sense, supply is created by effort, by pushing, striving, hustling, and attempting to arrange the pieces of life in just the right way. But spiritual supply moves by an entirely different law. It does not come because you strain for it. It comes because you are aligned with the source that knows what you need before you even ask. And that knowing expresses itself not through worry-driven thoughts, but through intuition, a quiet, subtle, unmistakable inner nudge that guides you in perfect timing. Goldsmith often emphasized that intuition is not something you manufacture. It is something you uncover when the mind is no longer cluttered with fear, urgency, or the compulsive need to control. Intuition emerges naturally from a consciousness that has learned to rest in the presence. It speaks softly, yet with an authority that is impossible to deny. It directs without force, it reveals without confusion, and it provides answers without the strain of mental effort. You may notice that intuition rarely speaks in dramatic revelations. More often, it shows up as a gentle impulse, a thought that feels unusually clear, a feeling that guides you toward a certain action, a sense of peace around one choice and constriction around another. These subtle signals are not random. They are the language of the infinite expressing itself through the quiet space within you. And here is where the nature of supply begins to transform. Instead of trying to create opportunities, you feel guided to the right place at the right time. Instead of forcing solutions, the right ideas unfold with ease. Instead of worrying about tomorrow, you sense the next step you are meant to take. Just one step, not the whole path. And as you follow these inner nudges, what you need for each step appears precisely when it is required. This is what Goldsmith meant by the effortless nature of spiritual living. Effort in the human sense implies pushing against resistance, but intuition moves without resistance because it flows from the infinite, not the personal will. It bypasses the narrow corridors of logic and taps into a wisdom that sees the whole picture. Past, present, future, and possibilities your mind could never grasp. You begin to notice synchronicities, meetings, openings, insights that occur with a precision that is almost impossible to explain logically. The exact resource arrives, the right person shows up, the next opportunity unfolds, not because you orchestrated it, but because you were receptive to the guidance that orchestrated it for you. And slowly, you start to trust this inner movement more than your own effort-driven attempts to shape life. You realize that intuition is not a mystical talent. It is the natural expression of a consciousness united with its source. And from that place, supply becomes less about working harder and more about listening deeper. And as this intuitive way of living becomes more familiar, no longer an occasional whisper but a steady inner guidance, you find yourself entering the final realization of this unfolding spiritual journey. As living by spirit unlocks a life guided, supported, and sustained by divine order, here, life stops feeling random or chaotic. You begin to sense that there is an intelligence, a rhythm, a harmony behind every movement, every opportunity, every closed door, and every unfolding path. Goldsmith often spoke of divine order as something already established, not something we create. It is not a future we must build, nor a destiny we must chase. It is an ever-present flow that becomes visible the moment we stop resisting and begin yielding to the inner guidance we have felt all along. When you live by spirit rather than by the anxious impulses of the human mind, you step into alignment with this order in a way that feels both natural and deeply reassuring. In divine order, nothing is late, nothing is missing, and nothing is wasted. Every step fits into a larger pattern that only becomes clear when viewed through the lens of spiritual awareness. What once felt like delays now appear as preparation. What once felt like obstacles now reveal themselves as redirection. What once felt like loss transforms into space being made for something higher, wiser, and more aligned with your spiritual growth. Living by spirit does not exempt you from the experiences of life, it reinterprets them. You stop reacting to circumstances as threats and begin perceiving them as messages. You stop clinging to old plans and begin allowing the path to reveal itself. You stop striving to control outcomes and begin trusting that the presence within you is orchestrating your steps with a precision your human mind could never replicate. This trust becomes the atmosphere in which divine order operates freely. You no longer make decisions from fear, urgency, or scarcity. Instead, you move from the centered awareness that your life is being guided by a wisdom far greater than your personal will. And as this awareness deepens, you find yourself choosing differently, not because you are forcing change, but because your consciousness has shifted. You walk away from situations that once held you in anxiety, not out of avoidance, but out of clarity. You step into opportunities that once intimidated you, not out of ego, but out of inner certainty. You release relationships, habits, and patterns that once defined you, not through struggle, but through an intuitive knowing that you are being drawn into a greater alignment. And through it all, support seems to appear in ways you could not have predicted. People arrive at the exact moment you need them. Resources flow without the usual strain. Solutions emerge just when the mind thought it had reached the end. You realize that divine order is not passive. It is actively shaping your life the moment you allow it. In this state, you no longer live as one trying to survive the world, but as one being guided through it. You feel upheld, directed, and quietly sustained. Not by chance, but by the presence that has been with you since the beginning, patiently waiting for you to recognize its hand in every detail of your life.